All right, so the first one I'll take a look at. Has anyone found that attachment theory just makes you pathologize yourself? I'm so messed up. I messed up everything because I'm either anxious or avoidant or disorganized. Okay. Rather than finding the knowledge helpful towards healing. So let's call this 5 steps to embrace your crazy. And before we get into those 5 steps, first I just want to address this notion of healing. So healing is a tricky word, and I use it in my online platform and in the products that I sell, my online courses and things like that. But the notion of healing is a bit precarious because if you are to believe that there's something about yourself that has to be healed, then there's a presupposition that there's something wrong with you, that you are broken, that you are not what you could be. Okay. And it's sort of important for us to dispel this notion in order to move forward, because that's basically a perpetuation of the same thing that is keeping you stuck in a spin cycle. So rather than think of it as working towards being healed, you might think of it as working towards uncovering aspects of yourself that perhaps you forgot, or aspects of yourself that for whatever reason have become obscured over time because your environment did not mirror them back to you, and so it became difficult to access those parts of yourself. But it's not so much, I want us to kind of dispel with this notion that I have to be healed. Think of it more as like a light bulb. Okay, imagine that there is a bright illuminated light bulb, and now somebody just splashes some paint on that light bulb. Now, maybe you can't see the illumination as well, but it doesn't mean that the light bulb isn't shining just as brightly beneath that coating. Okay, so rather than think of it as being healed or transforming from one thing into something else, even though I also use the word transformation, but rather to think of it as like kind of wiping the paint off, right? Sort of trying to recognize and get rid of, or maybe the word is better, to integrate some of the experiences you have had which have begun to obscure your illumination. Okay, so I just want to address that piece first. So let's talk about 5 steps to embrace your crazy. And I'm using the term crazy as kind of tongue-in-cheek here. We're not crazy. A lot of the things that we experience are just an evolution of our growth process, and that's not good and it's not bad. But let's just go with this for now. So the first thing would be to acknowledge the crazy. So that is to say, oftentimes we may find ourselves caught in relationships where we are just responding. There's a sense of stimulus and response, but there's not like a mindful moment out or a pause in between where we say, oh, I'm noticing that when they do that, this feeling comes up inside me and it triggers this whole subsequent series of emotional reactions and responses within me that compel me to act in this way without considering the consequences, or without taking the other person's perspective into consideration, or without thinking about what this might mean in the bigger picture, right? So usually there is some kind of catalytic relationship, and in my channel I refer to this as the anxious avoidant trap, typically, or it could be 2 other types of relationship styles where 2 avoidant partners get together or 2 anxious partners get together. Either way, there is a catalytic experience in love and relationships that sort of leave you with this kind of shell-shocked experience, like, what was that about? And why does this keep happening to me? And usually it has to happen a few times at least before you're willing to kind of sit down and acknowledge, okay, if this is happening in every relationship I've had, there's one common denominator, and that's me. So there's something that I probably need to look at in order to change my experience of relationships moving forward. Okay, so I call that number 1, acknowledging the craziness. Okay, number 2 is a natural progression of that, which is assess the craziness. So Yes, okay, now you acknowledge that there is an issue. You're acknowledging that there is a pattern and an experience of contrast in your life, which may be creating some form of resistance to completely filling up your own circumference. Okay, stepping into your sense with a sense of self-sovereignty. So now you start assessing what's going on. You're like, okay, you become that scientist of your own life, right? The investigator of your own life and inner world. And you start to look at what are these different pieces that are coming together that make up this whole puzzle. Okay. And that's when you step into the third step, which is learning new skills to organize those puzzle pieces. And between steps 2 and 3 is usually where people stumble upon attachment theory, or they watch it like a video like this on YouTube, or they read a book, or someone makes a referral to them because they've learned something and they think it might pertain to your situation. So then you start to assess, and now you're starting to learn new skills about how to organize that. You're starting to see how the different pieces come together, okay? So I'd like you to imagine it almost as if, like, let's say you had a box, a puzzle in a box, right? And at first, the cover is on top of the box. The pieces are all mixed up inside. You don't necessarily, let's say the box doesn't have an image on top of it. It's just a blank box, but there's a puzzle inside. And it's just kind of shaking around in the relationships that you've had. And now all of a sudden, some big catalytic thing happens, and the top has been knocked off the box. So now you've got all these pieces inside, and there's some kind of picture on the other side of them, but you don't have any frame of reference. So what do you do first? Well, you would take out the pieces and you would lay them all out so that you could see them all. And then you start to look at, okay, well, this one seems to relate to that, and this one seems to relate to that. And it may be an arduous process because you don't have a picture to reference, but you can, based on what you observe of the colors and the shapes and the forms on the top side of the puzzle pieces, you can start to guess at which ones kind of clump together. And then over time, that is going to start to build out the full piece. Now, most likely you will look for the pieces with the straight edges, right? Because that's going to help you build out the frame. That is like when you learn about attachment styles, okay? When you start to think of them categorically, when you think, oh, I think I'm more avoidant, or I think I'm more anxious, or I think I'm more disorganized, or I think I'm more secure, right? That there are some labels and symptom lists and descriptions of behavior and inner thoughts and attitudes that may feel more or less resonant to you. And so then you think, okay, well, if I assign that to the way that I attach to my partners, that helps me understand and learn a new method by which I can start to organize my own concept of myself. Okay. And some people resist this because it means on some level they're going to have to let go of and give up the idea of themselves that existed prior to that. And if there's a lot of value or, tied up in who they thought they were, they may resist wanting to explore these new facets. Other people, they're like, nope, I've hit my threshold. I've had enough. I am okay with letting go of some of the things that I used to think and believe about myself because it's become so intolerable that I'm ready to move into this new thing. I'm ready to accept this new concept of myself, okay? So we've built out the frame, right? We've got these straight edges, these nice categories and boxes of different types of attachment styles. That's me. Now I get it. Okay, now what? Well, now you start in step 4, which is accumulating skills, right? You become more skillful. Now that the frame is built out, it's much easier to identify which pieces go where, even if you don't have the full picture, right? It's much easier to determine which pieces will go where, and you start to fill out the frame because you have established the periphery. You've established the scope of the thing that you are trying to build. You've established some sense of boundary around your personal identity, and now you know better, well, I don't want to be so disconnected and aloof in my relationships anymore. I want to show up for my partner. Or I don't want to be so anxiously preoccupied and controlling and worried all the time about what my partner is doing. Like, I want to have a sense of ease in my relationships. So now you've created the scope, you've established the boundary, you have identified the desire. And so then that's step 4 is you start to accumulate the skills, go out, learn, acquire things that will help you start to fill out that frame, right? Then once you've started to acquire these skills, Now you have to try step 5, apply them. And really the best way is to forget everything you've learned. And this is kind of like, sort of like when you learn how to ride a bike. You know, at first you're really mindful about the training wheels and the feet on the pedals, and you're mindful about how the handles are going, and you're really keenly aware of how you're distributing your weight. And then over time, you don't have to, because the body just remembers, right? The body just knows, and it has complete confidence in its ability to balance on those 2 wheels. You don't worry about it anymore, right? It's like you don't think about all the skills and the different things that are going on within you to maintain that balance. You just are balanced. And so this is where we start to understand that these attachment styles are not so categorical. They're dynamic states that occur within you. It's like a spectrum that exists within you. And previously you may have hung out in one end or the other because that proved to be a useful coping mechanism for you in your environment and in the circumstances in which you grew up, and perhaps in your previous partnerships. But now that you've learned more about how that mechanism works, you have grown into this ability to play with that and to loosen it up a little bit, soften it a little bit, to be flexible. And so now you're starting to become more dynamic in the way that you move through your relationships and engage with your relationships, right? Or even settle and sink into and relax into them, right? Now it's much more easeful. But there is a path, there is a time, lapse, there's a trajectory that there will be that place where you learn about these things. And when you learn about these things, you will stimulate an inner critic, right? You'll say, oh, I'm so stupid, I didn't know this before. If I knew this before, then everything could have been perfect. And I'm just so messed up. I'll never be able to have a relationship. Look, this is me. This is what's my problem. And this is how messed up I am. And because I have this problem, I will never find love, right? So I would invite you in that instance to take another step back, to realize that you are still in steps 2 and 3, and that what you are witnessing in that moment is the inner critic being stimulated, and the inner critic resisting the knowledge that you have gained, resisting the trajectory of applying it well enough so that you can forget it. Because the inner critic, the aspect of you that has that judgmental voice, is really the seed of whatever that issue is that you're identifying, right? It is the core of the insecurity that we experience. And so now you're shining a light on it, and you're saying, oh, you're the one that is creating these scenarios. Oh, I see you. And the inner critic doesn't want to be seen, because that takes away its power, right? So it's going to say, oh no, don't look at me. And it's going to zap you. And then as it zaps you, you're going to start thinking, oh, I am so messed up. Oh, this just shows me how terrible I am, right? Because once you're on that spin cycle, then you're not attending to the real work, which is embracing all the aspects of you, which is stopping that automatic mechanism of punishing yourself for something, of telling yourself you're not worthy, of telling yourself you're not good enough, of telling yourself you're not capable of being in relationship, of telling yourself that you'll be smothered and die if you make yourself emotionally accessible, right? So that's like what I call a double trouble, where you beat yourself up for beating yourself up, right? And so the goal here is not to silence the inner critic or beat yourself up for having one, but rather to realize that oftentimes when we have an inner critic, its goal is to protect us from something. So in review, if you are feeling like, I've learned about attachment styles and now I'm beating myself up over it because it seems like I'm so messed up and I'm never going to be able to get out of these unhealthy patterns, okay? First, you want to take a look at your underlying assumptions and perceptions around healing. What does it mean to heal? Okay. And then secondly, remember that you are just at one point along your journey. You're just at one juncture along the path, right? And there's 5 steps to embrace this crazy. And that is, first, you're going to acknowledge it. Secondly, you're going to assess it. Thirdly, you're going to learn new skills to start organizing it. Fourth, you're going to attempt applying these skills in your life and in your relationships. And fifth, you're going to forget everything you learned. You're just going to forget it all. You're going to let all that worrying about red flags and how you can predict outcomes and if you're right and all of this, you're just going to throw it out and you're just going to let life move through you, because by that point, it has become secondhand knowledge. It's body knowledge. You're going to ride that bike completely easily. Okay, know that it's coming. Know that that is coming, and continue to be in your process, because it will happen naturally, kind of like when you're in a cold room and the sun shines in, and before you know it, you're warm and you don't even realize when that happened. Okay, that is how it will happen for you. So allow for the worry, allow for the inner critic, be in dialogue and conversation with it, and just recognize that this is good information for you. If you find that voice coming up, then that means you are moving along on your path. Okay. Hello, my name is Brianna McWilliam, and I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. If you like what you've seen and you want to learn more about attachment styles and how to call in the soul-shaking, passionate partnerships you want, make sure to comment, like, and subscribe to my channel, Attachment in Adult Relationships, for updates and weekly video releases.